Are there position battles, Richie, that you're interested in? I mean, I know there are. I don't know why I asked that like a question like I didn't know the answer to since we prepped for this show together. But let's go back and forth. Give me your number one kind of position battle that you're looking out for.
So typically, you don't bring in a transfer of Thomas Castellanos' age with how few eligibility he has left without some sort of a wink, wink, nod, nod, like you're going to be our starter. But I do think the quarterback position is going to be an interesting battle. I think Castellanos is probably the front runner, but I'm not ready to rule out Brock Glenn. You have a fresh set of eyes in Gus Malzahn, who's going to be, seeing what both can do. And obviously, Malzahn has done it with both types of quarterbacks. Brock, he's somewhat mobile, but not to the level of Castellanos. But you think of Nick Marshall in that 2013 Florida State game. Not a great quarterback, but a really great offense, just because of what Gus Malzahn was able to do. But I think Brock Glenn actually has a chance to really push Castellanos to the point where I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't think it'll be Castellanos, but I would not be surprised if one of the two leaves after spring, because we're going to talk about the spring window opening up here shortly. But yeah, I think it'll be very telling after spring. It's kind of like when Jameis had that great spring game and Trickett transferred immediately to West Virginia. Like he saw the writing on the wall. I think we could have that kind of moment, and I'm really excited to see. Obviously, there won't be a spring game this year, but we'll hear all about what's going on during spring football.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's somewhat of a battle, but I'll disagree with you on this. We agree a lot. Allie and I did a pod forever, and then we actually started a new show, and we disagree on everything. And so when we actually do agree, we'll be like, wow, it must be really true. Like if we actually agreed on something, you and I actually agree a lot. And, we never wanted this to be like First Take or anything where we just disagree and yell at each other, all the time. But I'll disagree with you. I'll say that both of them are on the roster when Alabama rolls into town. I just think that, like when I think Thomas is going to win the starting QB job. Yeah. And it might be close. It might not. Who cares, right? I think he wins it. I think that the style of his play and really like how up and down he's been throughout his career, I think this is probably Brock's best chance to see meaningful snaps at any major university. Now, could he transfer like way down to no disrespect, I like the hometown team. Could he transfer way down to like a USF and maybe find some success? Like, sure. But I think Florida State's his best chance to get in and see meaningful snaps again. And he's obviously got the relationships. I've heard things kind of on the backside. Like he likes his time in Tallahassee. Like he likes being here. He's a country guy. Like he likes the hunting, the fishing, all the stuff around. Yeah. And so I'll disagree there. I think he does stay. Now, I'm not telling you that it's impossible if somebody got hurt somewhere else in the spring or he got tampered with or somebody made him an offer he couldn't refuse, right? Like I think it's possible, but I think he's here because I do think that, knock on wood. I don't know if this is a real wood desk or not, but it came from Amazon, so maybe. But I think that there's always the chance when you've got a mobile quarterback that he could end up getting hurt at some point, and that would be kind of Brock's path to get in playing. And then I also think that Castellanos has been up and down at times, and I think that could be another chance that Brock has to get in and mix it up. So I'll again, we're not fighting here, but I'll disagree. I'll say that he is here, but I do think Castellanos wins the job. I think that. I just think that he fits what Gus wants to do better. He's got more experience. He probably has the higher floor and ceiling than Brock. But I like Brock a lot. I think that him sticking it out when I would say that, there was a point last year where we all thought Brock was going to leave because Luke would be the one that stays. And so I like Brock a ton. He still won us an ACC championship or didn't lose us an ACC championship. And so, I'm cheering for him. I'd love if he could go out and win the thing, but I am interested to see how that shakes out. I don't know that Norvell has to name a starter, but I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't name one until, unless Thomas like separates by so much that it's not even close. Norvell probably won't name one until halfway through the fall anyway. All right, I'll get right back to the video, but first I want to give some love to our friends over at Russo & Co. I told you about Chris Russo and his business last week, and it is certainly tax season. Hopefully you've already gotten your 1099s or your W-2s. Listen, Chris is a huge Florida State fan, just like you and I are. He's been a CPA since 2002. He got his MBA in 2004. He's also got a law degree. He's got 25 plus years of experience doing this stuff. And if you need assistance with any tax preparation, any tax advisory, if you need help with preparing 1099s or W-2s for employees, if you own a business, give my guy Chris a call. His info is down in the description. You can also see it here on the screen. Again, Chris will do his very best to get you taken care of, to make sure that you're getting your maximum refund, that you keep as little in the IRS's hands as possible, but of course, doing everything legally and not getting you in trouble. Chris will hold your hand every step of the way. If you mention that you saw his information here on Double Fries No Slaw, he'll give you a free consultation. Again, it's Russo & Co. Great guy, great Seminole, and hopefully if you are in need of any tax services, you will certainly reach out to him. We'll tell you more about him as the weeks and months go on, as we lead up to tax season, but again, appreciate Chris at Russo & Co. for their support.
Yeah, well, we're going to know heading out of spring, because we're going to know who got most of the snaps, with the first team. It will not be a surprise. I'm sure Norvell and then Gus Malzahn, it's a smart thing to say, it's going to be a battle into fall camp, because again, you want to convince everyone to stay there. But at the same time, I agree with you, TJ. I do think, Thomas wins the job. I think you don't bring him in unless Norvell thought that he was the answer. And, to get us to 7, 8, maybe 9 wins. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little robust there, but I definitely think that you don't bring in a older quarterback like that. It's one thing if you bring in a freshman transfer, but it's a completely different thing when you bring in someone who's played multiple years of college football at this point. I think you kind of, at that point, made up your mind. And I do love that Brock, chose not to transfer yet. And I hope he, sticks it out, because I think he does have a potential future. And to your point, when you have a mobile quarterback who's running all over the place, yeah, you're going to have an opportunity. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what the quarterback position does. I think it's probably not a huge battle, but something that I definitely will be monitoring, because I do think Brock Glenn has a future at Florida State.
So on the other side of the ball, my first one that we'll go with is really just all of the defensive line.
Yeah.
Like those are the battles that those are the battles that I think are probably, I don't know, would you say most important? I don't know if that's the right answer or not. There's just so many new faces. And I know you got Daryl Jackson back, but then outside of that, it's just completely new. Obviously, Pat Payton gone. Josh Farmer killing it right now at the Combine, which we're not really going to talk about the Combine because it's so, Josh and AZ and even Ryan are doing a good job, but it's so underwhelming compared to last year. And I don't know if anybody wants to talk to
Ryan hit a 60-yarder. I'll give him that.
I don't know if anybody wants to talk about, members that were on last year's team or not, or if they just want to remove that from their mind completely. But I am glad to see those 3 guys kind of going off and doing good things. But obviously Farmer's gone, Pat Payton gone, Marvin Jones Jr. gone. And I think that what you get out of that defensive line is going to be so important. Richie, I think it's probably the position group, the defensive line in totality, not necessarily, one position group, but the whole line that I have the most concern about. Like, is that fair? Like, teams ran all over us last year. And I'm not telling you I think that's going to happen again this year, but we got no push. Quarterbacks had forever. I think Cam Ward, was back there just like making ham sandwiches or something in the backfield. And we never got any push, and we couldn't stop anybody on the ground. And I'm not saying that that's going to be the same thing this year. I expect dramatic improvement, just because how could you not be better than you were? But how do you know? Like, how do you know that there's going to be that improvement with 3, 4, 5 new faces on that defense side of the ball? Daryl Jackson graded out really well at times. I saw Sonone going back and forth with people on social media about that. But, can he up his play some and really be that force? I kind of think that Amari Williams, with some rumors, some news that you may have had an injury there to Jenkins that may keep him out for the spring and summer, and then maybe even farther. Can Amari Williams, I would assume at this point probably plays more defensive end than tight end at this point, just because you probably need the bodies. You brought in a few transfers on the edge with James Williams, Demonte Diggs, Dante McCray from Western Kentucky, and then Diggs from Coastal Carolina. How do they all battle out? Like how does that rotation look? Can any of those guys kind of help you out inside? Can your young guys like Kevin Wynn, Tylon Lee, guys that are really, really highly rated, expected to be really good? Tylon Lee finishes a 5-star for On Three. Can those guys make an impact, right? And it's hard to make an impact along the trenches as true freshmen, but I think Florida State will need them. And so I think what do you get out of guys that have been in the program for a couple of years, like Daniel Lyons and others? So I think the battles on the defensive line are maybe the most important to me, right? I think offensive line, you're probably going to have 4 new starters on that side too. You think about the 2 tackles you got from the SEC, you think about the Wake Forest center, and you think about the guard you picked up from UCF. I don't want to say those guys are locked into spots, but it'd be pretty surprising to me if at least 3 of those 4 didn't start. And then you kind of think Richie Leonard might be your 5th offensive lineman. I think that the offensive line is going to be completely new as well, but I don't know if you have as many battles. I don't know if there's as much like, oh man, does TJ Ferguson beat out this guy or whatever? Or does this happen or that happen? You kind of know who your offensive line is going to be next year, and it's just how good will they be. So I think that position grouping is really important to figure out as well. I just think it's not as many battles. Like it's not as many like hoorah. It's probably those 5 guys that I just mentioned, and we'll see how good they are, right? And so the battles on the defensive line to me are maybe the most important on the team.
Yeah, and I think this year you're going to rely heavily on the transfers because defensive line is one position where very, very few true freshmen or even redshirt freshmen can come in and make a huge difference. Like you get your one freak like a Mario Williams, right, or something like that, and that happens, but it's not often at all. I do think that is going to be a fun battle to watch because if you were to ask everyone who covers Florida State to put their projected, starting 4 defensive linemen out there right now, they would all look completely different. Sure, there'd be, Jackson's going to be on there for everybody, right? But the other 3, I mean, it could be anybody, and it would be a little fun, bingo type game saying, hey, put down who you think are going to be the starting 4 come Alabama. And I think you would see a lot of different posts, which is, not ideal because typically you would love to know who they are heading into spring. So you can get them working together and get that, you know, that unison within the team or within that unit of the defensive line. But yeah, we have no idea. And, I do think you're going to have to rely heavily on the transfers right now. Just because, again, that's the one position, offensive and defensive line, where, yeah, you'll get a freak that every once in a while that can come in as a true freshman and start and dominate. But it just does not happen often. And especially not with, 3 and low 4 stars. It just does not happen.
So what's quarterback, defensive back? We both did 2 position groups. What's your next one? Or
Wide
defensive line.
receiver.
Sorry, I guess I just gave mine away. But what's your second one?
Yeah, so wide receiver, just because, again, you brought in Jalen Brown and Malik Benson last year, and, I had very high hopes, and they were both extremely underwhelming. I don't know if it was quarterback play or themselves, but you're bringing in some more guys this year, right? And I do think, does a guy like Hakeem take that next step and be wide receiver 1? I don't know if Florida State has a wide receiver 1 on the roster right now. I do think there's potential for one. I think Hakeem would be, the top pick for me if he can take that next step and elevate there. But then you got guys like Squirrel White coming in, who I think could be a wide receiver 1. But as of right now, heading into spring, I think we have a bunch of WR2s and not a WR1. Whereas, 2 years ago when you had, Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman, you had 2 wide receiver 1s on your roster, which is an embarrassment of riches. And, unfortunately they were not healthy the entire season, but, Keon won probably the LSU and the Clemson game for Florida State. I think we're going to beat LSU regardless. That was just a bloodbath, but that Clemson game, Keon won it. And then, you lose a guy like Ja'Kai Douglas, who, is someone who was always a staple. He was never going to be your top option, but he was Mr. Reliable. So seeing these new guys coming in and, the freshmen that are now sophomores, I'm really interested to see what happens at the wide receiver position.
Norvell, I think it's kind of smart, like to be somewhat measured in what you say after last year, because there was, and not necessarily from him, but there was so much hype around this team last year that I
Yeah.
think he knows, like, he can't overhype this thing, right? Like, he can't come out and guarantee you're going to Charlotte or winning 10 games or whatever, right? Not that he has ever done that, but I do think he's probably got to be somewhat cautious in how much he hypes things, because if he hypes it really high again and they go 4-8, then I mean, that makes people more mad, right? Part of the problem with when Willie got here was he was like, "Oh, we're gonna be great," and then they were terrible, right? Whereas if he'd have said, "Hey, man, this is a turnaround. We're gonna have to take time to build this up. It's not gonna be maybe the best from day one, but we're going to get there." Maybe it changes people's expectations a little bit, but we went to that Virginia Tech game. I thought we were going to win 10 games that year in 2018. So obviously it didn't happen. But as much as I do think he has to be measured, he has been hyping Squirrel White
Yeah.
and Deuce Robinson, and said that Florida State hit absolute home runs there. And you're never going to be down on your players. You're never going to say like, "Oh, we brought a project in, we brought in a guy, it's just going to be okay." So I get it, right? You've got to be positive if you're the coach, but I do think that that's interesting. And maybe they don't have a number one on this team, but maybe they do have three really solid number twos that could, if you have three really solid number twos, I think you are in somewhat of a good position. And then maybe through the year, one of those guys does elevate as time has gone on, and you are able to kind of see that. We've talked about the schedule a ton. I think getting a lot of early games that are very winnable. Like, I think there's a very obvious path to get to November at 6-2. That'd be beating everybody and maybe dropping your tough games where you'll be underdogs to Miami and in Bama. I think that if that's the case and that's happened, then one guy has elevated. And I do think it's interesting to see if anybody here in spring and then certainly over the summer and into fall can elevate. Is Hakeem your pick to be? Because I'm going to go with Deuce as my probable winner for like wide receiver one this year.
I think Hakeem, just because he's been in this offense, and I know with Gus coming in, it's a new offense per se, but it's basically the same offense. They're the same plays. He's just going to call it differently. And I think Hakeem, he's put in the work. I truly think he is going to be our wide receiver one. Now, would he be a wide receiver one at Alabama or Ohio State or USC? Probably not. But I think he has a chance to elevate his game. And if he has a good game against Bama, or even in week 2 against East Texas A&M or whoever it is, confidence is a hell of a thing when it comes to football or any sport, really. When you see players have confidence, their game just naturally elevates. In the same way, when you lose confidence, that you become like, do I even belong here? I think Hakeem's my number one guy. I think Squirrel and Deuce both have great opportunities. I think that's a great 3-man punch, so to speak. But at the same time, I need to see it, and it'll also be dictated by who does Castellanos, because we had this discussion. We think he's going to be QB1. Who does he gravitate to the most? Who does he trust the most? And if he trusts one of those three more than the other, they're going to be wide receiver one.
So my last one is defensive back, specifically cornerback. I'll talk about the safeties for just a minute, but I am a little surprised to see both Hussey, and we've talked about this, but both Hussey and who was back, Shaheem Brown back there this year. I wouldn't have been surprised to see either transfer. I do think that you had some questions around both of their level of play last year, and I've heard other people talk about this too. I mean, you can't. If you were going to get rid of everybody on the roster that just kind of quit at times, then you probably would have had to bring 45 guys in through the portal, because that's how many guys quit. So
I feel like Brown's been here for like 15 years now.
Yeah, no, I mean, from walking it off against LSU up until playing now as well, right? For 4 years, it's been a while, and I guess you're hoping you can get some of that magic back, of like his athleticism and the way he's played. So I think safety is interesting to watch, but obviously I'd probably lean towards two of those guys, or those two guys kind of holding that down. At cornerback, I think that is where it gets really interesting, because you've got a lot of talent on the team from, and where guys might play. Like, does Earl Little back up and play a safety role full time? Does he slot into like kind of a nickel spot at times? I think you feel really good about where Quindarius Jones is. Like, when he first got on campus 2 years ago, they absolutely loved him. And then he had some good times, some good plays for you, but you are replacing both Cypress and AZ Thomas, and I think that's going to be tough for Florida State. But there is a ton of talent there, whether it be Charles Lester stepping up, whether it's Jabril Rawls jumping in and taking on a bigger load, whether it's Jamari Howard, who was injured for a lot of last year, but you would hope that can give you something as a really highly rated recruit who's incredibly athletic, and you hope that you can get more out of there. And there are other guys in the mix too, but who steps up for maybe that cornerback 2 role? They're going to play more defensive backs on the field than less, right? Like they're going to play more often 5 or more. And so how does that all kind of shake out? Who steps up there? And, obviously the linebacker is a big question too, but if you're getting pressure with the front, which we talked about defensive line a minute ago, if you're getting pressure with your front, maybe you are in a position to where your cornerbacks don't have to be potential first rounders like AZ Thomas and Jarian Jones and Renardo Green that you've had the last few years. But if you get that level of play, and I'm not expecting anybody to play this year like AZ Thomas did, last year, but if you can get even close to that level of play from the defensive backs, from your corners, then I think this defense has a chance to be a lot better than you saw last year. But I do think it's a huge question mark just because I don't know. Like, I don't even know who I would peg as like the second starter right now or who's cornerback 2. And I think that has to get figured out between now, obviously, and the time that Bama rolls into town. But I mean, the good news is you got a lot of time to figure that out. So defensive back would certainly be my next one.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to watch. I think we're pretty well set at safety. Like you said, at cornerback, it's a little different. I think you pretty much handled everything there because we just don't know. And we'll see, who emerges in the spring because, again, there's no spring game, which, again, spring games, we talked about it last week. I think they're very overrated. And you can have a bad spring game and still be an All-American the next season. Or you could have a great spring game and be a nobody the next season. So I'm not too upset about the no spring game this year. But I think defensive back is definitely something to keep an eye on. And the good thing about being at Florida State University, you're always going to have talented defensive backs, right? If you look year over year at recruiting classes, Florida State always, one of their top 2 or 3 position rankings is always going to be defensive back. That's just
Sure.
have the talent. It's in South Florida. It's in South Georgia. It's in the Panhandle. We always have that. It's just finding who works well together and how they communicate and can they coordinate a defense. And to your point, TJ, if the defensive line improves and they can get pressure on the quarterback, it makes their jobs much, much easier. So I do think that's a very intriguing position to keep an eye on this spring.